Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 836th New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Cordy Ryman and Jeffrey Grunthaner. We are thrilled to welcome poet John DeWitt here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we're speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Cordy Ryman received his B.F.A. from the School of Visual Arts, New York in 1997. In 2006, Ryman was the recipient of the Helen Foster Barnett Prize from the National Academy Museum. Ryman's work was recently the subject of a year-long solo exhibition, Free Fall, curated by Thomas Micchelli at Tower 49 Gallery, New York. Ryman's work has been exhibited widely and is held in collections worldwide. Jeffrey Grunthaner is a writer, artist, and curator based in Berlin. Their articles, reviews, poems, and essays have appeared via Drag City Books, Bomb, American Art Catalogs, Folder, ArtNet News, Hyperallergic, and other venues. Past curatorial projects include the reading and discussion series Conversations in Contemporary Poetics at Hauser and Wirth Publishers, and Daniel Turner Drawings and Sculpture at Spoonbill Studios. Thank you all so much for joining today, and I'll turn it over to you, Jeffrey.
Hi, Cordy, and thank you, Brooklyn Rail and everyone. It's great to be here. And Cordy, it's a delight to be able to talk with you. I've been a fan of your work for a while now, and since we're talking about this one show, Collecting Sparks at Walter's Storms, I kind of wanted to open things up by asking how this exhibition came about. Do you have a long-standing relationship with Walter Storms, or is this your first exhibition there? And have you shown in Germany and Munich before?
Yeah, I'd known Walter Storms before. I'd had a couple other things there before, but not on this scale. Like before, I was in a couple group shows there, and then I was in another sort of one-person presentation, but I wasn't. It was a much smaller thing, and I wasn't present for it. So they put it together. But this was the first time I'd sort of gone out there and seen the space, and so that was cool. And I'd shown in Germany before also.
Do you find the reception of your work, at least your current body of work, the way you have been doing things for at least the past few years, is the reception here interesting? Do you think there's like a different tradition maybe that kind of vies with your more New York-based practice?
I don't know. I mean, I don't speak German, so I don't really know what they're saying most of the time.
Okay. Right.
It seemed like people seemed like they were kind of into it, but I don't really know. I haven't really had an opportunity in New York on this sort of scale in a while, so I don't really know what the difference would be.
Okay. But these works, you have shown, if not these exact works, things similar to this. Certainly Constellations, I think a few years ago you showed at Freight and Volume. Is there like a significant difference that happens when you like transition to like a larger space, or do you feel it's more like the same idea sort of becomes like more spacious?
Well, yeah, I mean, everything that I do sort of scales to space, and makes use of whatever sort of space is at hand. So it is a different kind of thing. I mean, the possibilities are much, when you have a big space, you have many more possibilities.
Right.
So yeah, the space sort of enabled me to do something that I hadn't really been able to do before the same way.
Is that why you chose like these particular works are shown? Well, I guess one question I should ask right away, like, are these individual works titled?
Yeah, they are.
They are. Okay,
but
so
the squares are not all titled. The boxes are not titled, but all the individual sort of little constellation works are titled.
Okay.
And they're sort of,
So when you selected works for inclusion in this show, were you trying to what justified the inclusion? Like, did you feel like these are works I could really build from? These are ideas that I could really like develop in this type of space, or was it something more curatorial and imposed from without? It's like, Cordy, we really love these works and we think they'll work like really well in this gallery.
I mean, really, I mean, it was just the things that are in the show are really just the works that I've been working on for the last, number of years. So like I have a wall in my studio, which is similar in scale to the wall at Walter Storm. So for the most part, it's kind of like what I had here. And it was just, it was unique for me to have an opportunity to sort of do that, to sort of transport it in full. Yeah.
Okay, so when you're making these works individually, well, I guess that's the question. I mean, especially within the constellations, are you making these works individually and then you sort of find a way how they could all like cohere? Or is it more like you have this like more holistic sense of like these are going to like end up in relation to like other particular works?
No, I mean, when I'm working on those works, I'm just sort of working automatically and without kind of an end game in mind, and I'm just sort of going. And then, then they sort of accumulate, and then I, spend other time sort of curating. I sort of spend time curating the works when I can't work, if that makes sense. Like, but for the most part, like my day consists of coming into the studio and just sort of continuing on sort of these. I have like 3 or 4 or 5 different sort of projects going at once, and I just we'll pull things off the wall and keep working. And then in terms of how they're assembled, I sort of deal with that later, or that sort of is kind of very kind of flexible and will depend on the space. But the works in this show, I mean, there's the big constellation wall, which those are all individual works and they could be put together any number of ways. But then I took other small elements and sort of fused them together into single units, per se, like the spiral here and the other ones where I have like 5 by 5 tiles.
When you're assembling these works, like you mentioned the spiral, and obviously I think like a square seems to recur, a lot. Right. Do you think of these as like almost like archetypal or like sort of like almost like metaphysical abstract forms, or is this just seemingly like a way where it just like grabs your attention? Because I feel like, and what I want to come around to the interview, it seems like your work like kind of communicates this significance like through like rhythm, repetition, and the way like space is like distributed. And so yeah, I'm wondering like what your attraction is to these particular shapes, let's say.
I mean, they are kind of archetypal shit. They are like, sort of all of these sort of moves are things that have come up, in my own practice over the last, 20, 30 years. And they come up again and again and again. And like, this, and why they come up, I'm not exactly sure, but I, if I go back to like the beginning, like in 1990, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4, like I'll see, I'll see a spiral and I'll see a target, or I'll see a certain angle or a certain compositional element, crop up. And then, I'll sort of ride it for a little while, and then it'll drop away. And then it'll come up again in 1996, and then it'll drop away, and it'll come up in 98, and then it'll drop away, and it'll come up in 2003 and 4 and 5, and then it'll drop away for a longer period of time. And I guess what's different in terms of this show, or what's different in terms of the last really 5 years, 4 or 5 years, is I sort of became conscious of the fact that the same sort of things, or the same branches, or the sort of motifs or icons kept coming up, again and again. And it was, I mean, for the most part, for the first, I don't know, 15, 20 years of working, I didn't really look back. But then at some point I started trying to get more organized and, had people sort of help me catalog work or photograph work. And then I sort of, for the first time, sort of started having these chances to look back and see these branches come up again and again and again and again. And then I guess in the last 4 or 5 years, I really kind of it became a more conscious thing where I would sort of drill down into these different kind of elements and try to figure out, I don't know, in some ways, like what I've been doing all these years. I don't know that I have a full answer, but something's like happening. Yeah. Something is like developing. I mean, there's the same things keep coming up. And anyhow, so if you look at like any one of these these like sort of paintings where you have like the 5x5 grid, or you have the small constellation pieces, they're all, each one of these moves is something that goes way back, and it probably goes back before me. And like I think that these are like, it's sort of the language of of art of a certain generation, I guess, like, and I don't know.
I mean, they also have like an extremely traditionalist meaning too. I mean, certainly the spiral. I mean, that goes back to like prehistory,
Yeah, sure.
And even like the formation of constellations themselves, you could say.
Yeah.
So if I were to ask you, like, were there any like formative influences when you're developing this? Like, let's say at the time 4 or 5 years ago, when you first became like conscious that these were recurring themes and that you wanted to work with them a little bit more exclusively, maybe more with more focus. Were there any particular inspirations or influences that kind of led you to this artistically?
I think that what sort of happened was that in, I don't know when it was, maybe after 2017, 2018, I started working. Before that, I did the Free Fall project, and that work was all like sort of huge and really very large installations. And after that show, sort of a bunch of sort of things happened in my life, and for one reason or another, I was not able to work large, and I had to sort of change my scale, and I started working very small. And I had like some medical stuff happening, and I just wasn't able to work for a few years the way I had been working before. And so I started working on small things. I had a guy who worked for me, Justin, chop up dice up these, beams, and I just started working on cubes because I figured that no matter where I was or how I felt, I could always like work on a cube. And so I started for about 6 months or more. I just worked on these little cubes, and I found that I was working at a faster rate than normal, and so I was sort of churning through ideas much faster, and that sort of made me much more aware of the same things coming up. Like I'd be like, here would be like, a half moon, and then there'd be a spiral, and then there'd be a square, and then there'd be an angle up or an angle down, or a thumbprint, or I don't know. I can't. I ended up, after a year or so of just sort of going automatically, I realized that like there are about, I don't know, 15 to 20 kind of things that I just sort of have that I just keep doing. I have some sort of connection to, and why that is, I don't really know. But I started trying to like work specifically with those things to try to, I don't know, piece it together and maybe make sense of my life some weird way, or my practice. And so that's what this show sort of comes out of. This show is sort of a distillation of like that 5 years from 2017 to now. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't remember your question.
No, that was great. I kind of don't either, but you raise another one. So given kind of the let's say open-ended significance of these very readily identifiable patterns and such, how much like leeway do you give your viewers when they're interpreting or taking in a work, or do you feel like when you're let's say at least installing, to say nothing of working on it, that there's some kind of like message, or if not a message, like a kind of particular response you're trying to generate?
I'm not clear. What's the question?
Basically, when you're not so much in the studio assembling the individual works, but when you're presenting them in like a context like Walter Storm's,
Right.
do you want, are you installing them in such a way that viewers would have ideally like a particular response that you are anticipating, and it's like, oh, this is going to affect them in this way? Or do you, like, for example, we're looking at the Constellations right now, do you have like a more like kind of, oh, I just want the viewer to be here and kind of free associate and kind of come up with their own meanings? Like, how does
Yeah.
meaning?
I mean, I'm not trying to like, I'm not trying to elicit any sort of specific response, you know. I mean, I
Right.
guess like I want it to be like, you know, I want it, at the very least, I want it to be interesting to look at, you know. I want it
Of course,
to be,
yeah.
I mean, for me, like, you know, they're sort of about, you know, creation and joy, and they're life affirming, and so and for me, like, they kind of like, for me, like I feel like my artistic process, or my life, or, you know, the way I work, it's sort of, you know, these are the things that kind of like, that I rely on, you know, they carry me, and I rely on them, and kind of a quasi spiritual way, and you know, they kind of carry me through, and I guess like I would like I'd like people to look at them and, you know, think whatever they, you know, it'd be nice if they had, you know, the same sort of wonder or joy would be nice, but they don't have to. I'm not trying, I don't have a manifesto or anything.
Right. Okay, cool. Well, I think I was trying to get at more like the sort of quasi spirituality. Like, I think that's definitely communicated, and it's almost like you don't really grasp the nature of the work if you kind of lose sight of that. I was just wondering what that was about.
Yeah. I mean, they are. I mean, they're about life. I mean, they're about kind of, I mean, I think they're connected to, they're abstract, and they use the language of sort of abstraction as I know it since 1971. You know, I wasn't here before that, but you know, they, like, each piece is an individual thing, but each piece is related to other pieces, and has kind of like, you know, has like sort of relations. Each piece is related to ones of its type, and then they can be grouped together, or they can be with other, I don't know. I'm going to talk myself in a hole, but I mean, they, you know, they can be individuals, or they can be, you know, communities, or they can be,
be constellations. Yeah.
I don't think of them as sort of needing to be a fixed thing, you know. And when I do a show, I might map it out, or I might have like, you know, I might have instructions so it can be the way it was, but I don't feel like it has to be the way it is. You know, like it could, you know, you could take half of the material and, you know, stir it up and do a different show, you know.
Yeah. Cool.
Which is what I did in the other, like the piece with the squares, the sort of the big mountain piece, like that piece was that I had an installation with that piece in at Conrad Fisher in 2017. So I reused those same pieces because they were already in Germany, and I wanted them to have a second kind of life. So like a lot of like the big installations will be reused and have like second, third, fourth lives, you know. So I think that's, I don't know, somehow feels important to me.
Yeah.
And then from here it could go, you know, I don't know, like it could be split. I don't know. I don't really have any hard and fast rules on.
Okay. And concerning the materials you use, like you predominantly prefer wood, right? And on some level.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, in like the 90s, it didn't start out that way, but then like sort of after the 2000s, it gradually migrated to mostly wood. I don't, you know, yeah, it's become mostly wood, but that wasn't like a planned thing. It just sort of happened. But wood is kind of amazing. Like, you know, wood has got is for me, it's like really easy to work with because it has so much, history and sort of content already in it. And it is kind of like, it feels like a living thing. Like, and when in doubt, you can always just paint out the wood grain, and go from there. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's quite interesting because, saying like, for example, you already had works at like Conrad Fisher that you wanted to like reuse, kind of also like the genesis and the reproductive cycle of like trees, or like, there is like this, again, almost cosmological feel in the way like these things are like assembled together and the way they interact.
Right.
Yeah. And all right, so question of material is done. Sorry, just checking my notes. Material. Oh yeah. Okay. So in relation to the wood, how do you? One thing that I really admire about your work is, especially like on this scale, sort of like what could abstractly be called like relationship between whole and parts. But I think like given the materials you use, wood, for example, in this particular exhibition a lot, there's almost like maybe I want to say like a folkloric quality in the way like details kind of like emerge that I guess just happen like in the process when you like install them. But like the sense of like living detail that your work like communicates like through these like very almost like repetitive gestures. I guess that's something you would like prize, or is that something you've like struggled to cultivate, or?
I'm not sure I understand the question exactly.
Basically, the details, like how do they emerge from the whole? Like for example, in this one work that we're looking at now, it's a very large installation, but like there is like these little moments where it's not just the whole, like it's all these like living details, shall we say, as opposed to merely decorative like aspects, Yeah.
I'm going to say yes. I don't know. I don't,
Sure. Okay.
I don't understand.
Is that something that interests you generally, like maybe
yeah.
outsider art, or yeah?
I mean, yes, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know why I can't seem to understand the question. But yes. Yeah. Next.
I could move on to another one. I mean,
you can rephrase it. Or ask me another question. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. And so when you're assembling these and when you're working, like, is there like an autobiographical aspect? Like you mentioned, you're working in abstraction, but are these autobiographical to you and for you?
I think not consciously, but by default, yes. Because I'm making them, and they're from my world. And there's stuff that spins around in my mind, and it's part of a language that I was around, and so yeah, I think that, I mean, I'm sure like someone could drill down into that and find things, but I don't, I'm not specifically trying to, I don't have specific things that I'm, I don't think of it in a very specific conscious way, but I know that it's there,
Yeah.
And, I mean, one thing I like about the language of the one thing I like about this sort of language is that it can kind of absorb and take whatever you have to bring on any particular day. So like, it's not contingent upon me being happy or sad or like being clear-headed or gauzy. Like I can come in and work, and whatever kind of any kind of all different types of things can like grab me on a particular day, and
that's awesome.
Very kind of like, I don't know, like I don't have to like most of a lot of my practice is sort of constructed around allowing me to just come in and work and sort of get into that place where and I don't know, I've said this probably a lot of times, but it remains true where like I like if you think about the beginning and ending of a painting or a work of art, and you start at 0 and you end at 100. Like for me, like my favorite place is to be sort of between, 20% and 80%. Like starting can be difficult,
Yeah.
and then ending, like once you know you have something really good going, like finishing something off can be scary because you tighten up. But like that middle sort of period between 20 and 80%, you can just kind of like work, and your mind can kind of like, because your mind is not like your judge, all the judgments sort of leave. You have enough sort of structure and enough parameters going on to enable you to work freely, but you're not so close to the end where things get precious and tight.
Yeah. So when you're using these linguistic metaphors, like language or grammar, for example, I mean, so you do kind of consider these like motifs, like an impersonal kind of language that you're like manipulating.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, in a way.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. And I mean, having grown up in like an artistic family, was it difficult for you to like find your own individual voice doing this? Like you mentioned, like changes from the 90s and such.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering.
I mean, I think that like every situation has its own like weird things about it, and like there were. I mean, I don't think it was ever hard for me to make work. Like I always like was pretty good at making work. I mean, whether I made something interesting or not interesting is something else. But like just I mean, I knew from early on that like I needed to make things, and then like in terms of like the family stuff or like any of the baggage or stuff that comes with that. I mean, those things sort of I dealt with in different ways during different periods in time, and sometimes it was a thing to contend with, and other times it wasn't. But yeah, it was.
So you never like felt yourself like, because you did mention that like it wasn't until like 4 or 5 years ago that like kind of this dawning consciousness came of the language that you're working within. Like you never really found yourself like, oh, it's like I'm struggling to find my own individuated voice or something like that. Or
No, I mean, I think that I always knew that I was working with a language. What I didn't know, and like I always knew, like early on, I was like when I first started working with abstraction, I was pretty disappointed in myself and upset. I was using like what I thought was like my parents' language, right? And I thought, like, God, I can't believe like I fucking become an abstract painter. It wasn't what I had thought. Like as a teenager, that wasn't the work that I was making, and it wasn't what I thought I would do. So like when I stumbled upon that language and started using it, there was this sort of aspect of like being, having a little bit of shame about that and feeling like just weird about that. But then later on, so like my 20s, I sort of wrestled with that. And then like, I guess in my 30s and 40s, I sort of came to the conclusion that it was fine. And it was, it was my language, like it was my language as much as anyone's. Like, they both came to New York in the 50s and didn't know anything about abstraction and learned it then. And I was around it from the beginning. So it was kind of I don't know, somehow I became okay with it. But then like later on, the last 4 or 5 years is when it really sort of became clear the specific moves that I was making repeatedly, and like before I was not like tracking it, or like, conscious of the compositional elements that repeatedly would come up. Like I wasn't aware of how sort of heavy and consistent that was. So I've been trying to like drill in more to that.
Cool. And when you're making these works, like for example, so each painting is one that you set to work on individually, like without necessarily like considering the others.
Yeah. Well, like with the one that's up there right now, like in that sort of grouping of what is it, 36?
Sure.
There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paintings that started that were totally independent paintings. They were singular, that I considered singular paintings that were kind of done.
Mhm.
And then I was, at the same time, I was working on the same scale. I was working on these 13 by 13 inch, wooden sort of tiles. And I had the, 5 or 6 blue paintings, which just happened to be blue, that were finished at different times over the last few years. And then I brought in all the other blues. I just decided I wanted to see what all the blue ones looked like together, right? So I brought in finished and unfinished blue tiles to join that one. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And then I probably made, once I had, 27, 28 blue tiles together, and I saw like there was potential for a single unit, then I probably made the last, 7 or 8 or 9 specifically to make something to tie the unit together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
absolutely. Yeah.
So like there's like, so in that painting there, in this like one work, there were, 5 or 6 individual sort of units that were their own entity, I thought. And then there were probably 5 or 6 things that were blue and were beginning and had potential, but maybe weren't something I thought was going to stand on its own. And then,
Mhm.
I don't know,
It's
my math isn't good enough, but another 6 or 7 to tie it together.
I think it's really interesting that you have these in this particular work, like kind of these finished paintings that you felt could still be even more finished or more refined by kind of letting them into this like grouping setting. I mean, is this something I mean, obviously, I guess for the past 4 or 5 years you've been doing this, but how long have you been like thinking in this way? Or because I want to get at like how you feel about I guess painting generally, because I think most painters would just like have those like kind of 5 or 6 be like that's the work, but
Right.
you want to take it a step beyond and further contextualize it.
I didn't want to, I just did. I don't know, like it just happened, like
Okay.
it wasn't like I planned to do it, but I found that like when I would put them together, I was conscious of the fact that in order for the whole thing to feel the way I want, if you go back one, in order for the whole thing to feel the way I, want it, in order for the whole thing to sort of feel like its own entity and to feel like its own kind of like living, breathing, living thing, you had to have like those anchor pieces that were really tight and, finished. And then you have to have the ones that are like in between that show the materials and show kind of the process. And, I mean, those are the ones that let it breathe. Like if they were all like equally super finished, I feel like it would kind of choke, maybe.
Sure. Yeah.
And then
At least
in
you
order for the whole thing to kind of come together in the end, like, I don't know, I felt like it needed like we see those ones where it's like, like the one in the lower right corner, that sort of just blue angle, and then the upper right, there's a blue angle, and like the one down on the sort of brackets kind of like, probably were done, towards the end or move to the edge in order to kind of like make the thing, I don't know, hold together.
Yeah, totally. Do you have any specific preferences in terms of color palette? Like, is there any like particular combination of colors that like really appeals to you that you tend to find yourself drawn to a lot?
Yeah, but it changes. Like, so I'll go through like
Sure.
periods. Where I'll go through for like a period where I'll kind of like kind of fall in love with a color or combination of colors, and then it'll sort of gradually wear off, and then I'll move on to something else. But like right now, for some reason, I'm working with a lot of browns. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, I will get sort of like into certain colors for certain periods, and then they'll drop off, and then until they kind of cool off, and then they'll come back. And that happens with other things too. Like there's certain, like, I'll get into stripes, or I'll get into spirals, or I'll get into, sort of like, I can like go down sort of like wormholes with it, or this or that for periods.
Do you ever find yourself like alluding to like maybe a canonical or at least maybe like favorite like painters within your works? Like
Not consciously, but I'm sure that they're like, not in a conscious way, but they're not, they're all there. You know what I mean? Like I didn't invent, I didn't invent this language. I didn't invent, there's nothing like within any one piece, there's nothing like new. I mean, it is like, they're all what I feel is part of like a language, and like abstraction, you know, in relation to the rest of art history, is a fairly new language anyway. But
Sure.
I don't, I mean, I think that like if you were to like, I don't know, if you wanted, if someone like did a study of like, you know, what was in the house when I was growing up and what work was around, like I'm sure you could find echoes of all of that and all of those
Yeah,
people, and, you know,
right.
and what I'm doing now. But I wasn't like, you know, I don't really think about it consciously, but I know that those people are in there. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And
Sure.
and at this point in my life, I'm like okay with that. Like I guess in my 20s, like I was maybe upset and like horrified that they were in there.
Right.
You
Okay.
Or when they would come up, I would be, you know, I'd be like, you know, I don't know,
Yeah.
whatever. But I mean, at this point, I feel like I'm good with it for the most part.
So, and like as a painter though, I mean, one of the things you're trying to do, as you mentioned earlier, when you had like the 6 or 7 finished paintings, and you wanted to kind of maybe foreground even like the process. Like you didn't just want the 100% completed paintings, you also wanted like the in-betweens and the 20% and stuff like that. So like who would maybe be your forebears in that regard, you know?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's so many people like that. I mean, there were so many people that were around that worked in such a way that where the material was so apparent, but I wasn't really like taking notes, and I wasn't like, you know,
right.
But I mean, like, yeah, I mean, there's so many. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to. And I could name a couple people off the top of my head, but I don't want to leave anyone out. So, but there are a lot. I mean, there's nothing. There's nothing new going on here. If that makes sense? Like it's not. But I do feel like there is. I do like the actual material to have a, you know, like when the raw, like if you're looking at this mountain, like if you didn't have like the raw ones, that the other ones wouldn't look. You'd become blind to the others, you know.
Yeah, no, and I think that's what I was trying to touch on earlier when I'm
and then
talking
the
about
in-between ones, like the ones that are just kind of like fucked up or like smudged and this and that, like it's all kind of makes it like that's what makes it a living thing, because like, you know, we're all fucked up too a little bit, right? Excuse me, I couldn't be cursing. Oh my god, sorry.
Yeah, well, I think that's what I was like trying to touch on earlier when I'm talking about like living detail. Like there has to be like kind of these like almost like disruptive or I guess raw, for lack of a better term, like moments that's gonna like feed into everything like as a whole, and like give it a you know, a body, you know, and make it like real, you know.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So sorry, just let me check my notes real quick. And so, for example, like the mountain, right? Have you shown this work before? I would assume if you did, like not in this scale, but have you shown that one before?
The mountain one was shown at Conrad Fisher, but it was in a different room, so it like wrapped around 1, 2, 3, 4 walls. So it was a very different. It was a different. It wasn't a mountain. It was like something else.
Okay.
But those pieces were, you know, that the material was used for different installation, sort of. Yeah.
So do you think kind of like the way it resonates, or like the kind of like significance of it is like has changed, like given how it's like spatially distributed, or do you think like the materials more go to work and kind of the like the rhythm between like maybe pieces that don't fit so well and pieces that, you know, seem more like finished or whatever, like
I think it was sort of like the pieces, and like the pieces all together like are you know, it's kind of like a cosmic soup, and it's going to be alive one way or the other. And
yeah.
you put it in a different room, it will find another. It'll find another form. You know.
Sure.
So I wanted to get, like, I've done that sort of in the past with other sort of big installations where it had like, you know, multiple iterations. And so I wanted it to have that chance. And then like the pieces that are the 2x4, the wood that is in the works, I mean, basically what it is I guess in I don't know when it was, like after 2016, 17, I was doing a lot of work with 2x4s and did a number of big installations with 2x4s. And when the installations are done, like when the shows are over and the installations come back, they just sort of, they're just, like when the installation is up, it's like a living thing, but then when it comes back, it kind of dies and it's just kind of lying around. And so my studio was like full of like 2x4s, like painted 2x4s that were part of installations. And so what I did was I separated them out and I kept like a sort of representative, if I did like a wave piece, like I kept, maybe 25% of the wave or 30% of the wave, put it away. But then the rest of it, I just chopped up. Like I had all of my extra, this is like every 2x4 in my studio. Like this is every 2x4 that was in my studio in 2017 or 16.
Okay.
Chopped up and made into a cube. So like it kind of like absorbs the remains of all the other installations before it. Like if you go back in, I don't know, like like I had a green wave and you can see remnants of the green wave in there.
Mm-hmm.
I had a number of, I don't know, there were enough, this piece is basically the remains of I don't know, probably a dozen other installations.
So
and also whatever extra material I had. Like so I had 2x4s that I was using as cross sawhorses as tables. And those had, got splashed with paint. So those got chopped up and made into squares also. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's where you get maybe that's where the, some of the, I don't know, folksy randomness, it has sort of everything in there.
Yeah, sure. And so given how, let's call this a very fluid process, are you kind of like thinking in the back of your mind, like different, like kind of materials or shapes or forms that you can maybe like throw into this mix and kind of like revitalize it? Or do you just like stumble on something that's like, oh, okay, this is working really well, I'm gonna like keep making it like this? Like, do you think ahead, or is it like,
Both of those things happen,
Okay.
Yeah, and both of those things happen. So like I'll stumble upon things and ride them and then think about them and make conscious choices. Or often, like I will have, like if I have a show, I'll look at the space and I'll make a very specific planned work where everything is sort of considered. But then in the process of making that, I'll make a tremendous amount of cast-offs, which spawn other things. So it kind of goes both ways.
Mm-hmm. And when you're kind of determining for yourself like the success or failure of an individual work, like is that like do you have that established beforehand, or does it sometimes happen? It's like, okay, now when I juxtapose it with this in this constellation, for example, it really hits,
Say that again, or rephrase that.
When you're putting together the how do you determine the success or failure of a given work, given the fact that you could sort of recontextualize it in relationship to others, almost like a mosaic,
Right. I don't know.
Okay.
A lot,
you just keep working. You just keep working.
I just keep working. I mean, I keep working, and I put things together, and I mean, like I will come in and work, and then at times when for whatever reason I'm stuck and I can't work, I'll come in and curate. That makes sense.
Okay. Curate your own work.
I'll put things together. Like I'll go on automatic pilot making blue tiles, and then I'll come in and I'll be so annoyed with it, or I don't know, maybe I have an appointment later on in the day and I can't get my clothes messed up, so then I'll start curating the blue tiles.
Yeah.
And in terms of what when it works, it's like that, like I don't know, that's like a that's kind of a mysterious thing. Like I don't really know, like sometimes it just clicks and it works, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it clicks and you think it works, and you come back on Tuesday and you realize it didn't work, and you change it.
Well, because that's what I'm trying to get at. Like given how these paintings present, like, is it sometimes like while you're doing the installation that it's just like, oh my God, like this hits, or it's like when you're doing the installation, it's like this doesn't actually work according to plan, you know?
Well, like when I'm doing, like when I went out to Walter Storms and I had it all kind of fairly planned out. And
Okay.
there was like, I was worried that it was not going to work, you know, so like, like there's like, every time I do a show, there's always like a thought like, all right, this is the time, it's not gonna, you know, maybe it's not gonna work. It's
Right.
not gonna work as I hoped, but it always seems to, like, it worked. Like, it always seems to
Cool.
work somehow or another.
All right. And do you do, like you mentioned, like curating your work? I mean, do you do any like curation, like apart from your own work, or occasionally, or is that something you're interested in? Is like the curatorial strategies, or like how to present a work, or you know?
Is it something I'm interested? I mean, yes and no, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I yes and no.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Like probably more like in terms of your own work, you feel like that's kind of something that comes into play, whereas with others, it's like maybe not so interesting.
No, actually, well, I don't know. They're different. They're different. Like with other people's work, I feel like I could. I think that. No, I mean, I could hang someone else's show. I think.
Yeah.
I think that would be interesting. I mean,
Okay.
it's a lot of work to hang a show, and like so I'm not volunteering, but I think it could be fun, you know, it could be you know, it could be fun. I mean, I think that when you're hanging a show, it's kind of like making a painting. It's the same sort of, I mean, it's a different medium, but it's the same, you know, the same sort of components. You're trying to figure out how to make a room work and how to activate things, and you have a certain set amount of pieces to do it with, and whether it's my work or someone else's work, it's still like a its own kind of thing. I think curating is its own art, you know, and I think that anyone, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think anyone who's a good curator, or anyone who's like curated a show, like, you know, like appreciates that. I think that watching shows not my shows, but watching like other people's shows be curated, like when I was, you know, a teenager, like had a huge effect on me and how I thought about, you know, space, you know, because I didn't like, you know, made it really clear, like, you know, the space, you know, making like a show is its own work in a way.
Yeah. When these works, for example, like Green Box 25, go into collections, when they're collected, are they assembled or acquired as like a whole, or do collectors sometimes just get like one part?
So like this, like the last two you showed, like that would be one whole.
Okay.
But like the Constellation ones, they could be in part.
Yeah.
And like, I would think, I mean, I don't know, like, yeah.
Yeah. And then the process for the Constellation part. So again, like to kind of reiterate what we were talking about. So they're kind of like miniatures, let's say, right? Like the individual paintings that these like greater pieces are composed of. So you'd be working on like the miniatures by themselves, right? And then like you sort of like find this like way that they all seem to like cohere, like some kind of a process, if not narrative or thematic, or like how do you know they're like converging, you know?
I mean, just by playing, I mean, by, I don't know, just like any kid with blocks knows,
Right.
Okay. play around with them. I mean, like, you know,
Sure.
I work on them as individual things, but then like I sort of I have like periods where I'm like sort of generating content, you know, and then I have other periods where I work with the content that's been generated.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know how else to explain it. Like, and it can go back and forth. Like, you know, like I have things like become part of other things.
Yeah.
But if no one else wants it and requires it, I mean, it's very possible for it to fall apart and become individuals again. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, no, it does. And so like these works, like let's say like a constellation piece, it's never like formally fixed. Like that's the point, right? It's always like kind of this like ongoing assembly, deconstruction, construction type vibe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right, cool.
I mean, like this piece you're looking at now, like when I when I shipped it out, when I took it off of my wall, like we made a template so it could go up exactly the way it was, right? And then when we got to Walter Storms, we put it up exactly the way it was, and then I moved it around a little bit.
Okay.
So like if
The
someone
the whole constellation moved around.
the constellation, I kind of tweaked it a little bit. So like,
Yeah.
but like I'm fine like with both. You know what I mean? I feel like there should be, there's a way that there's a recorded way that it was, but I don't feel like it has to be exactly like that.
Right.
In order to sort of be alive.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of the things that makes your practice so interesting is the way, like, obviously there's a conceptual aspect, like kind of as long as the concept is there, it's more or less like that work. But there's also like a very pronounced spatial aspect to it, the way it's like rhythmically distributed and stuff, almost like sculpture. Like obviously you're a painter, working with paint. Do you in any way categorize this to yourself? Like you're talking about like play and playing with blocks and stuff like that, and I think that's a really cool attitude to have. But are you ever like I don't know, trying to find like a word or a category or a genre this falls under?
No, not really.
Not really. Okay, you don't
I mean, like
need
I'm
that
fine with
to-
whatever. Like like people have like asked me before, like whether I think I'm like a painter or a sculptor or some sort of hybrid, and I don't really like. If I'll take whatever label you want to give me.
Okay.
I guess it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't. I don't really have a preference. Like I don't know. I don't think about it. Like I want them to be kind of like. I think I grew up. I like to look at. I think of it. I like looking at paintings, but I like making things. And then I also like want the piece or pieces to feel like a living entity or its own kind of individual thing. So like, however it like does that is fine with me, and what it's called is fine with me too, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And so like, again, like I wanna, we might be closing out a little bit, but I also want to like return to this like concept of like livingness. And is it, I assume like that, obviously that's very important to you, and that's kind of like what the work is about. But do you ever like find yourself like really struggling to achieve that with like any given exhibition or opportunity, or is it something that just always seems to like happen?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I struggle with that all the time. I mean, I feel like whenever I'm in the studio, that's what I'm sort of struggling with. I'm like working on stuff and trying to make whatever I'm working on. I'm trying to like, kind of like, jolt it into life. And,
Right.
When I get frustrated, I'll move on to another piece and start working on that. But like, but yeah, that's always the kind of goal, to make it seem like it's happened, but doesn't, sometimes it happens easily and sometimes it really doesn't. Like,
Right.
and you can't always really tell necessarily, but sometimes you can. Like sometimes I'll work on something so long and I just can't get it. I just can't get it to come alive, and those things end up getting chopped up and become other things.
Okay.
So like
So
that happens a lot, actually.
Right, and maybe that's how you came about this like manner of working in general. It was to sort of contextualize dead matter, so to speak, and to let it regenerate.
Right.
Okay, cool. And yeah, I don't know. I think I might have one last question. Let me just check. Oh yeah. I don't know. I don't really want to ask the banal question, like what's next or whatever. I'm a little bit more curious, and like when you were like making this particular show, at
Sure.
Walter Storm, like, were there any individual like inspirations or influences that maybe tied into this particular showing of these works as opposed to others?
For like
Because you've done these works in different iterations, was it like,
Yeah.
oh my, was it like not just the site specificity of the space, but it's like, oh, I some event or something where it's like, I want to do it like this time, you know, and then like what might have led to that, you know, like for example, the mountain piece.
Yeah. Well, I think that the thing that was different about this show and this group of work is that, you know, it was done like over a 5-year period where I was mostly working very small, you know.
Yeah.
And even when I went large, like there's, you know, there's almost nothing in the show that's like bigger than, I don't know, 20 inches square, you know.
Yeah.
And so it was like, that was different, and that maybe made it seem more like a, you know, a cosmic soup of sorts, you know. And it was a different, you know, it was a, you know, anyone who was paying attention, it was a pretty weird period of time, last 5 years. So yeah, this was just my, you know, what came out of it for me. So
Cool. Awesome. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Cordy and Jeff, for this dialogue. We do have several questions from the audience, and I'm going to go, let's see, to Erica first. So you should be able to unmute. Oh, here you are. Let's see. Can you unmute now? You should be prompted. Okay, great.
Okay, yeah. Hi, Cordy. You know, it's funny, I was laughing because the whole time, there you are, one of your little pieces, and you were talking.
Yeah.
I didn't even know, I hadn't even realized that it was up on my screen. But yeah, you were talking about the constellation pieces and how sometimes they can be separated, but I really need a little mini one, so I'll work on that.
Yeah, come over.
In any case, you answered my question. I was just going to ask because I was looking at the mountain and you referred to it as an organism.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the way that you're painting each of those blocks and painting the wood and I was just thinking this feels like a fluid painting. And I didn't know how if you categorized your work as painting or because it straddles sculpture too. So you answered my question when you said you don't think about it. So that was it. But good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Thank you, Erica. Thanks for your question. We are going to go to our friend GE now. You should be able to unmute, GE.
Thank you so much, Carol and Jeff, and of course, Cordy, thank you so much for the time and the generosity of spending it with us today. Listening and looking today, I know this is a little far-fetched in a sense, but I kept coming back to some of the spiritual quality of the thing, which got me to thinking of a quote from the anonymous work of the 14th century mysticism, The Cloud of Unknowing. Now, and in that, the quote is, the universes that are amenable to the intellect can never satisfy the instincts of the heart. And that then pushes me to wonder and question, in your work, is there a constant dialectical shift between graphic representation of energy and form with something that's unspoken, unseen, something of wonder, of course, and something of overall continuity? I'm sorry, that's such a long string.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Yeah.
Say that again.
Oh, sure. So in the work, is there like this constant, shifting and dialectical going back and forth between the sort of the graphic representation and the need to do that, and the energy and form that involves with something that's kind of unspoken, of course, the unseen,
Right.
maybe the invisible, or
Yeah.
and of course the unspoken, but obviously something of wonder too, but then also of continuity, of that big continuation of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I hope so. And I feel those things when I'm working, or when it's working well, yeah. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you so much, GE. Let's see, the next question is going to be from Logan. You should be able to unmute.
Okay, hi, Cordy, how are you?
Hey, Logan.
Good to see you. And Jeff, we haven't met, but we've worked together a little bit online. Anyway, so thank you for this. So I also have a question. You've touched on a little bit, but I see an exciting dialectic in your work between these highly formal systems and structures and something that's always trying to resist those systems, like to resist all systems and structures in a way. And you kind of, you have both, like you sort of need the system and then you have the thing that's resisting or going against. I'm wondering if you could talk about that a bit. What is that thing that's resisting the structure?
I mean, it's there. I don't know exactly what it is. I mean, I feel like it's like, I don't know, but I mean, I do feel it. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I feel it's, I mean, I think that it's like, I don't know, humanity doesn't want the, I don't want the, like you want the structure and you start grabbing it, but then you don't really want to be contained. You don't really want to be like, I don't know. I don't know how to exactly to phrase it, but I think that like the structures, like a pure, true structure is too, it's not really achievable. I don't know. It's not really real in a way. Like, I don't know. Like, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the way you're talking about it, saying like humanity.
Like, we're imperfect, so it's not like, it doesn't feel like, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Like, I don't know. I set up structures and I set up parameters all the time. And then I always give myself sort of permission to break them. But I want them to be there. So
Yeah, right. And I think just kind of to push a little bit,
Yeah,
and then I'll finish up. But just that I think it's more than just something formal. I think, but there is like it's a sort of metaphor for something social in a way, a kind of like conformity versus rebellion, or kind of inner like struggle between perfectionism and freedom or something, like.
yeah. Something's happening.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Logan, for your question. And our final question today is going to be from our very own Fang Bui. Should be able to unmute, Fang.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Cordy.
Hey, Fong.
Thank you, Jeff. I like GE's question and Logan's question, which remind me of a drunk who lost his keys. And in order to find them, he got to be drunk again, I think that's how you do it in regarding to this whole idea of having the system and then had to repudiate against it. But so the title of that big piece, Cordy, Go Hungry Mountain.
Yeah.
So my question is, where did that come from? And I will follow up with the real question afterwards.
Because that piece gobbled up, whatever, the remains of all the other installations that were lying around. So, and it's a mountain in this form.
So you kind of build it into the form of a mountain, so to speak.
Yeah. In this yeah.
Interesting. Well, I don't know. One thing about Cézanne. Cézanne was obsessed with Saint Victor, the mountain that gone
Yes.
back and forth and painted so many times until his death in 1906, really. And he hated technology. One thing we know that because of sight of those beginning of the soap factory built around him, blocking the sight of his beloved landscape and whatnot. So he talked about that a little bit. But you know, a friend of mine named David Hinton, one of our great translator, if not the greatest, of Chinese poetry. And he wrote this book 3 years ago. It's called Hunger Mountain, Cordy, which is a mountain up in Vermont near his home. So the whole book is about him going back and forth to pay pilgrimage, take walks, and beginning to pay attention to every detail in nature and whatnot, which bring me to my, because he's famous for having committed his life to Chinese culture, the way nature infused with human in a way. In other words, human in Asia and the East is considered very insignificant in relation to nature, you know. That's why you see that in Chinese landscape forever. So I wonder, because I know and have observed your work for a long time, you don't take space for granted. In other words, you seem to make installation which remind me according to the given space.
Right.
So one of the great Vietnamese proverbs, which I hold dear to my heart, which is how I curate my show, different condition, different space. And the Vietnamese proverb that goes, when you live in a long tube, be thin. If you live in a barrel, be round. So my sense is that, are you interested in any Eastern philosophy?
I'm not interested, but I mean, I think that I like that sort of concept, you know, and I think of art in terms of that. Like when I'm working, I think of art as you know, I feel like I should be able to take up whatever space is available, you know, and you know, it's like a plant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good answer.
Yeah,
Thank you, Cordy.
Yeah, thanks,
Um,
Paul.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And now we bring the mic back to Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Fong, for that question. And thank you, Cordy, for all your answers. So here at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm so thrilled to welcome John DeWitt to this stage. John DeWitt is a poet and researcher living in Marseille. Recent writings include 2020 Pretzels from Materials and The Necklace Spokesperson of the Garden of Earthly Delights from Face Press, as well as a doctoral dissertation on the work of Clark Coolidge. Thanks so much, John, for being here. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Cordy and Jeff, for letting me accompany you for this event. I'm going to read from 2020 Pretzels. It's from a few years ago, but it's easier to excerpt from than the work that I've been doing since then. And part of why it's easy to excerpt is because each poem is a pretzel of 20 lines. And I just want to show the titles because that's one of the things I'm most proud of. They're just pretzels.
Awesome.
It's finally just me and you, computer, feeding into the largest pool of information ever to exist. Happy screen memories sitting on the river bank eating fries at 5 a.m. The best thing to do is just show up. Mom, Dad, I just got here and I'm toast. Rats. The square dancing boys are no good either. Where would you be had you not that for whom you should be like that? You'd be at home in the dark. This is less a question of grammar than origin. If I could only see the status quo. I used to miss you, but now I forget. Nothing beats the joy of disappearing when you put out the light. See that tiny light over there? It's huge. It's the old man in the sea boat that's always floating between things. Oh Lord. I'm sorry to hear about your dog. Her paw couldn't do a lick of moves. She can no longer sleep, which makes sense. I wish I could play the piano for her. Oh, my girl, what am I to do? You see me as a chicken, you dog. So maybe I am a sack of grief, but that pup was published in Cambridge Companions to the Damned. Ma gave the child the dog a bark. I heard the dog. I hated that dog. The dog that I had really loved Bones every day. What a muck it made. You'd think it was a group, but really it was a lucky underdog. Sometimes I get carried, oh, why is that a duck? Why is that a duck? Every time I'm grilled, I'm stumped. I never get bored with crane, derrick, winch, hoist, davit, windlass, tackle, block, and tackle sheer legs. It reminds me of the smell of soil when it rains. Grammar? You know, grammar. You're playing with games. If you ask me, I'd rather a legible dangle than the method kink. I was having an oodle on my way back whole, and then it clicked. After a long day's journey to the end of the night, the river of poetry floods the house of language, leaving our faculties drenched in ecstatic twinkles. The rehearsal of nails by screws grips my mind and blows. For it to be good, there should be a little dose of pain. I'll have a large. I dig into the wound in more ways than one, zero in on the mind. Not such a fake cough after all. A swine walks into a complex of used ducks a week from now. What bootstraps? Just passing through. Foot for foot on the god-gabbling slabs that topple, flip. The mouth of hell for entrance to death's limited time. The refurbished coffin is half off with doodads, and the afterlife strike momentary gongs with a T-shaped long-handled tool used for squeezing water from cement floors. Bummer about the comb, though. I've been thinking this since forever low to the ground. Perfect futureless vision. It becomes midnight at 12. Everyone feels it. Whenever I sit in the basement with my Yamaha, I forget the above. I wish everyone would have a great summer. The ink goes well when you pour out the eggs. And one last pretzel. It's finally, no, that was the first pretzel. The last pretzel. Perfect lemons. What's trucking you is trucking us out a club window, past spelunkers and caves, straight into linguistic tents, and downward to the materiality of the hubbub. The rich seem to get Arthur and richer and do. The watermelon of our times gets sliced and the wazoo mapped onto whatever is left after disaster. All is well by the screw principle. After you, incoming twig. I'm heading off now to the garage, voy where shit happens to the pickup of the owner of the lawn watering with his hose. Turn goof on lane. The traffic's good. All be damned. There's no language left to buy me a pound of 10-penny nails. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, John, so much. Really, really love that. Such a really cool way to end today. Thank you again, Cordy and Jeff. Thank you, Ashley from Art Cake, for your support in preparing for today's event. We would also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. For 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a poetry reading curated by Aditi Machado. And you can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, and
Thank
thank you,
you.
Cordy,
Thank
for fielding my
you.
question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Cordy.
Jeff, John.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
John, for the
And-
Hey,
reading.
all. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for the
guys.
pretzels, John.
Happy
Thank you for
Tuesday,
reading,
everybody.
John.
Happy
Thank you,
Tuesday.
Cordy. Thank
Thanks,
you,
Long.
Jeff.